what's up? I'm Amin Dhillon, and welcome to my podcast. I'm sitting down with the movers and shakers and the stars to chat about life, love, business, and being a total boss. It's raw, it's candid, it's the stories behind the headlines. This is In Conversation.
And the authenticity principle is rooted in the key idea that in order to cultivate self-love, we must know, embrace, and be who we are.
Ready?
Yeah.
Okay. Hey everyone, welcome back to the podcast. Today I'm sitting down with an award-winning author, speaker, and life coach. Ritu Bhasin is here. How are you?
So good. Thank you so much for having me.
It's so nice to connect with you because we've spoken and now we've officially met in person.
I know. And then I've checked out a lot of your social media stuff. And
I've been stalking you as well.
So good. I'm all about it. I'm all about openly admitting that I'm cyber creeping people. Yeah. And you do such great stuff.
Thank you. That's such a compliment coming from you because I was looking at your videos and you've actually inspired me to step up my game because you, I think, have the coolest job. This podcast is all about inspiration, but you actually travel and bring inspiration to people so that you help people become the best versions of themselves. I'm going to say it in one sentence like that. I don't know. How would you describe what you do?
Well, I think you put your finger on it really well. I'm about helping to build a more empowered world, so where people feel like they can exercise choice and control over how they behave, so they can be their effing best in life, overcome barriers, obstacles that get in their way. And then in particular, what I'm really committed to doing is building a world where everyone feels belonging and feels like they can be their best, and essentially interrupting what I call forms of supremacy, white supremacy and white male supremacy in particular. So that's what I do for a living. And yet, when we talk like this, it is kind of cool. It is a really cool job. I'm mindful of that.
Because I've been watching your videos and I was like, there's ways where you have so many different topics. We've talked about this before. So many topics that you deal with. But one of the things that really stood out to me in your bio was you help people understand and embrace who they really are. And I was like, that's deep. That's a deep sentence right there to go, do you actually understand who you really are?
Yeah, that question, who are you? Or let's phrase it from the individual perspective. Who am I? Just pause for a moment to think about that. Who am I? There's so many different labels and titles and descriptors that come to people's minds when they put that question forward. But actually sitting down and answering it in a soulful, honest, candid way can feel really daunting, and yet it's probably one of the most important gifts we can give ourselves in life. I learned the hard way because I for so long was so lost in terms of who I am. I got to a point where I actually couldn't have answered that question properly. And now, after having done so much work around it and feeling finally better about who I am and understanding who I am and then embracing who I am, I'm living what I think is my best life for now. And it's worth all the work. It's worth every moment of it.
Well, your journey, it's amazing to see where you are right now, but you've had such an incredible journey to get to this place where you feel like you're living your best life. So let's take it back, shall we? So you're first generation Canadian like me.
So I'm technically second generation.
How are you second generation? Aren't your parents from Punjab?
So here's what Stats Canada. So here's some nerdy geek. Shall we geek out now?
Let's geek out.
So as a diversity consultant and speaker, I geek out. I'm all about data and definitions and what have you. So when our parents immigrate to Canada, so we're sitting here in Toronto, Canada today. When our immigrate to Canada and they become citizens of Canada, they are first generation.
Interesting.
We are second generation because we were born here.
I always think it's where you're born. That's you become that first.
So we're second generation.
Okay.
Isn't that interesting? Yes.
I should change my t-shirts.
Yes. Well, there you go. Yes, you're second generation. Although, I often tell people so I'm not an immigrant directly, but I was born into an immigrant household. Yeah. And I might as well have been because when you grow up with parents who are immigrants, and especially when they're starting out and they're new to the country and they don't have a lot of money, that feeling that you have. I think people can relate across like nationality status. So my parents immigrated to Canada almost 50 years ago now, and me and my siblings, we were born in, it's like the quintessential immigrant upbringing, right? Like my dad had $100 to his name. He came from India, Punjabi Sikh man with a turban in the early 70s. He's 6'4", like strapping Punjabi dude. And people repeatedly told him, you have to cut your hair, shave your beard, take your turban off if you want to get a job. And so he worked really hard as a bachelor here, saved some money, went back to India, met my mom. From the day they met to the day they got married was like under 5 days, came back. Yeah. And then my mother joined here months later, and they built this life. And so we grew up like really working class, lower middle class to begin with in my journey. And growing up, my parents would talk a lot about the racism they experienced as new immigrants. And I, in tandem, had my own experiences as one of the only kids of color, like brown girls in my class and in my school growing up, my own experiences with racism. And so from a very young age, I learned two things. Number one, that the more I pushed down my Indianness, my brownness, my smart girlness, the fact that we weren't fancy, and played up the I'm just like you, white rich kids who are growing up in this neighborhood that my parents massively financially stretched so that we could move in so that I could have a better education. I'm just like you. It would like help me to gain some level of acceptance while still being rejected and being made fun of all of the time and being bullied. I learned to not be me. I learned to push down my differences. And then the other thing I learned is that I, like the good Punjabi blood running my veins, was a warrior from the beginning, and I wanted to fight against the racism I was experiencing, and I could see my parents were faced with and others were faced with. And so both of those spirits like I carried with me, which is why I said earlier, like I remember being a young adult and being lost. I didn't know who I was. And the reason I was lost and I didn't know who I was is because I basically became whitewashed. I stripped myself of as many of the markers of being Indian as I could. Like I was brown skinned and I had a brown name, but I had people call me Ritu Bhasin back then. Whereas now I'm like, nah man, my name is Ritu and it's Ritu Bhasin and you need to say it right. But I disassociated myself as much as I could with brownness, because when I had stepped into that, it brought me social rejection. I was alone. I had no friends, and because of the racist bullying. And it was a few cataclysmic things in my life that led me to a place where I was like, I got to shift and live differently because this is not working for me. Pretending to be someone I'm not, like pretending that I grew up fancier than I did, rejecting my Indian or my Punjabi culture and embracing more of white Canadiana, which didn't resonate with me, but I did it anyways to fit in and to get ahead. I was battling that whole journey with my identity at the same time as building this career and doing really well at it in basically a white man's world. And so I said I wanted to fight racism. I decided to become a lawyer, but I thought I was going to do social justice work. And instead I ended up on Bay Street, akin to Wall Street in the US, and created a really successful business career, but around me being someone I was not. And so while I became successful into my late 20s, into my early 30s, I was successful career-wise, but I was lost in my soul. And it was a turning point for me.
That is so interesting, because it sounds like your whole life you've felt like you've never fit in. And that's a very long time for you to always have that feeling of feeling like almost being fake.
Yes, 100%. Yes.
And there was never any resources, any ways before that you could have addressed it?
You know, I would say, like, now I've written a lot about authenticity, and I have a book called The Authenticity Principle. And so I would say in some spheres in my life, I was being authentic. So I was always authentic in using my voice. I was always a social justice warrior. I always spoke my truth on that front. I never held back. I'm a gutsy, feisty, ballsy personality woman, and I didn't hold back in that either. But in other ways I did hold back, and this would be, for example, not talking about my culture or my background, or hiding aspects of who I am, or trying to tone down aspects of my personality or identity that I thought people won't like because of the messaging I've received. So in tandem, I was both being me and not being me. And that experience of having conflict and tension in me all the time was really difficult. And I think this is the case for a lot of us. But you know, it's interesting. I really struggled with belonging from a very young age because I was first born in a very multicultural working class neighborhood, Scarborough, living with my family. When my parents, when I was in grade 6, around the age of 11, my parents made the decision to move me up to like move us up to the whitest place on earth that they could find without moving us into farm country. And this may resonate with you because I know you grew up in Manitoba. But so I was moved up to the place called Unionville, Ontario. And so that's where my experience of being like the lonely, only brown girl started. And while I was a teenager, not only did I feel social alienation and rejection at school with the white kids, but I also experienced social alienation and rejection amongst Indian kids. And, you know, this is an interesting thing because we talk a lot about racism and bullying, and I think it's really important that we do that. But I don't think we often talk about intra-group bullying, because I was also bullied by family friends and people in my community who I was too brown to be accepted by the white kids, but then I was too white as a brown girl to be accepted by Indian people.
Yeah, I get that.
And so like on the Indian side, I was called like a coconut or an Oreo, and like because I wasn't Indian enough for them, but then I was too Indian for the white kids. And so it was a real struggle for me. And you know, I know now, I hear from people all the time, they can relate because it still continues to happen.
It sounds like regardless of where you are in Canada, that when you immigrate outside of your home country, that unfortunately trying to find that balance, especially as a kid, like there's no manuals. I don't know how we're able to find that balance.
Can you relate to what I'm saying? Like,
oh, absolutely. Because I grew up in a mostly white neighborhood. I think there was like 3 brown kids that we in school, and my friends were. I'm gonna have to show you photos. Every time people come and see my photos of my friends, they're like, "You're the one that sticks out," because all my friends are blonde,
100%.
like white, blue-eyed, and then there's me. So it was cool because I was stood out, but at the same time, I always felt very Canadian first. And I never thought it was a bad thing, but it wasn't until I would go into Indian gatherings where all of a sudden, like, I wouldn't have Indian friends. And it was almost like people thought I was rejecting my cultural background. I'm like, no, it's just because I grew up in a different neighborhood and my friends are there. I'm not going to actively travel to go make Indian friends just so I have Indian friends, right? So
totally. And you know, it was interesting because when I think back to it now, and as you're speaking, it's like making the memories come back. So I was always like a feisty, outspoken brown girl, even back then, and which was not common. Like it wasn't encouraged back in the 90s and 2000s, I would say, for us to be vocal and gutsy and ballsy. I also I called out a lot of shit. I was not comfortable with the sexism in Punjabi culture, Indian culture. I was not comfortable with also being siloed. Like to me, I want friends who come from all different cultures. Like I didn't want to just hang out with white people, and I also didn't want to just hang out with Indian people. I wanted mixed friend groups. And so I hung out a lot with people from other cultural communities, and I think that was uncomfortable for a lot of people in my parents' family friend circles. And it was you need to be Punjabi to the bone, to the core, to be accepted here. So
let me ask you, your parents, what was their outlook?
They wanted me to marry a Punjabi Sardar man. Like they were like that. So it was like all about that. But then they were like, go have white friends and go hang out with white people and don't just hang out with Indian people. And then I would do that. But then it was like, no, but now you have to like, how are you going to find, your Punjabi handsome, dashing suitor? So then now you should go hang out with Indian people. So it was a bit of both. It was quite mixed. But my parents were actually surprisingly progressive. Like I grew up in a really progressive household, which I think is why I'm in a place where I am now, where I can, I'm on a mic all the time, speaking really openly about stuff that other people of color, other women may feel more uncomfortable doing. I think my parents are very feministy. My mom actually, like as a kid and even now, literally will walk around the house fist pumping, like literally going like this, women's lib. Like she pumps into the air, women's lib.
Okay.
My father would not call himself a feminist, but he's very feministy because like he's the one who sewed the curtains, did all our hemming. He packed our lunches. He did all the grocery shopping. He did a lot of the cooking. He still does. My mom is really unwell now and is unable to cook and clean. And so my father in his late 70s does all the cooking for him and my mom and all the cleaning, still does the sewing, still buys me groceries, even though I'm grown ass and more. And so I grew up in this like really oddly progressive
Yes, you did.
Punjabi household. Like at the age of 17, when I had my first boyfriend, well, first official boyfriend, there were maybe like half of one before that. But when I had my first official boyfriend, it was a white guy. His name was Dave, because there were very few Indian people to choose from.
Dave.
Yeah, hi Dave, wherever you are now. I have all kinds of negative expletives to use to describe you, but anyhow, I will not say
no,
that.
Dave, do not contact us. We don't want
no.
to.
I know it's in the past. It's all good. Moving forwards and onwards, healing. We can talk about my dating life if you'd like as well. I'm happy because the book I should have written was on heartbreak and not on authenticity, although they do go hand in hand.
They do.
So when 17 years old, my first boyfriend, Dave, white dude, I told my parents and he came over. Now this was after several years of fighting with them to let me have a boyfriend, but then I did have one and he came over. And since then they have met all of my major boyfriends who have come from many cultural communities, like and not Indian. They met many boyfriends from other cultures, white boyfriends, black boyfriends, purple green boyfriends, before they finally met my current partner, who is Indian. He's South Asian. So I definitely grew up in a household that was very different than most Punjabi households, but it still had that imprint. Because I was so feisty from a young age, and my parents were very progressive in many respects, they gave me more leeway to talk openly and fight them. I railed against a lot of what they said. Like they were very strict. Like I grew up in a really strict household initially, but I fought and I railed against their rules a lot. Why? Because I got straight A's. I had a job. I had decent friends. I wasn't on drugs. I wasn't like drinking and doing evil, corrupt shit that they would have deemed so. I was a good kid and I just wanted to have fun with my friends and I wanted to explore dating and my sexuality and more. And so I fought them and I fought them from a young age. And I will tell you this, I'm so grateful that I did, because what I have learned and seen amongst other people and from my own experiences is that if you constantly give in to other people's expectations for how you should behave, you essentially give away your power, because they then get to decide your happiness. And the longer you do it and the older you get in doing it, it gets harder and harder to unravel. So I always tell people, like when you're in your teens or in your 20s, even if you're in your 30s and if you're in your 40s, it is not too late to start putting up boundaries and saying no and fight for what it is that you want to have happen to you. Because as long as other people are making decisions for you about how you should live, they get to control your happiness, versus you saying, nah, I'm not doing that. Why? Because it doesn't accord with me. I'm going to do me and be me. So I did that from a very young age, and I'm grateful that I did, because my parents didn't have a choice but to give up their reins on me as I became older. So like I sit before you now as someone who, I wouldn't be doing the work I'm doing had it not been for me fighting for my autonomy and my independence. Like I say what I want, I do what I want, I go where I want. The same spirit has helped me to feel free and liberated to do whatever I want career-wise without worrying about judgments of my parents and my family friends and social circles. Like I could really give a shit what anyone has to say. I could really care less. But also professionally, as a successful entrepreneur and building a business and more, and building an online brand and profile and all of that, I don't care what other people think. And I deeply believe in fighting and working really hard to achieve everything I want to achieve. And that spirit and the ability to do that starts when we exercise the muscle. And the sooner you learn to do that in your life, the better.
So in terms of being happy, because that's like such a big statement. I feel like that's like the big thing right now. Everyone's like, how do you find happiness? How do you be happy? Be happy with your career. Be happy with who you're dating. Be happy with the overall life you've had. Be happy with your friends. And it's like, Do you think essentially, if you could break it down, someone was like, Ritu, how do I become happy with my life? Is it just not caring what others think about you?
So I was just at my therapist, I think a week ago or 2 weeks ago, because I'm all about therapy, talk therapy, body work, and all other forms of healing that help us to be better. And I, again, would not be successful had it not been for all of the therapy I've done and all the healing work I've done. So I was just talking to her about this concept of happiness. Happiness is not a destination. It's a practice, and it's in the moment with us here and now. A lot of us, when we think about being happy, we think about this place that we get to. If we only do A, B, and C, and then we'll arrive at this destination called happiness, and then we will be happy forever. And what we don't see is that happiness, first of all, it's not a destination. It's moments of joy that we're elevated and we're lifted. No one can be 100% happy in every sphere of their life at every given time. And instead, what we want to start, how we want to start viewing life is being in a place where you're anchored and rooted. So regardless of if there's crappy shit swirling around you or if there's good stuff swirling around you, you are always anchored and rooted to who you are. You know your purpose and meaning in life. You know what your values are, and you're using those as a compass or an anchor to make all of your decisions. And then you can have moments of like happiness, and you can have moments of sadness, but you're still anchored. And in fact, that place of being anchored, I would call it a place of contentment or joy. Joy isn't spikes of happiness or euphoria. Those are moments of happiness or euphoria. Joy or contentment happens when we're as peaceful as we can be with who we are and ourselves and our values and our lot in life, and we stay rooted in that. Now, holding that in mind, your question was about how do we find happiness, and for me, was it not giving a shit about what other people think about me?
Because I know a lot of people come up to you and ask you questions, and I feel like right now the hot topic is, if you look at any articles or if you look at TV, it's always like, be happy, be like, everyone should have the resources to be true to who they are. But then I'm like, that word happiness, like, what does it mean? How do you actually achieve it?
Yeah. So I'm going to be straight up. I constantly am exhausted, overwhelmed, stressed, mildly miserable, cranky as F, like constant state, because I travel so much. I'm constantly on a plane traveling for work. I just did 6 loads of laundry this weekend. Like, I kid you not. Like, I actually did 6 loads of laundry because I had not been home for so long and whatever, complaining the entire time I'm doing it, and more. And so am I happy in these moments? No, I am not happy in these moments. However, I am anchored and I'm content and I'm joyful in the sense of I feel grateful about my life. And so this is why I want people to be really careful. Everyone listening after today, I want you to be careful with realizing that the objective isn't to be happier in life all the time, because that's not going to happen. You can't be happy in every single moment. You want to be anchored and you want to be content in who you are. And then you have moments of happiness. For both, whether it's seeking joy and contentment, like that anchoring, or when it comes to seeking happiness. For me, the number one way to make that happen is by knowing who you are and then loving who you are. And in fact, it all goes back to self-love. And self-love is such a hippy-dippy concept. And I think people are like, that sounds so cheesy and like it's so stupid because it seems so flaky. However, all of the research that you read as it relates to self-growth, self-empowerment, leadership development, mindfulness, diversity and inclusion, neuroscience, psychology, entrepreneurialism, and more. And I deliberately point to these buckets because these are the places where I teach and I speak out on and I do my work in. All of them point to self-acceptance and self-love, which is this idea of like going back to what we were talking about earlier, like, who are you? And do you embrace who you are, or are you constantly fighting your identities? And so, for example, so many people out there have lived experience with anxiety and depression and addiction, and we don't talk about it, and we hide who we are, and we feel ashamed, especially in cultures where there's a high amount of what will people think and what will society think. We don't talk about the truth. Or when it comes to sexuality, we now know when it comes to sexuality, it's no longer just gay or heterosexual. There are people who are are pansexual, asexual, queer and questioning, and more. People who don't identify as either being female or male or even trans, and they're like, I'm in a different category altogether and I'm exploring that. And so, yet, because society judges us, and actually, when I say society, because we as individuals judge others and we push our biases or our negative judgments towards others, on the receiving end of it, we feel like, well, if you're going to judge me and you're going to think I'm less than and you're going to take your love and friendship away, well, I shouldn't be who I am. I should change who I am or mask who I am. And even worse, we become lost in who we are and we fight, we self-loathe and we self-hate. The fundamental essential for being in a place where we feel anchored and content and joyful is self-acceptance and self-love. It's the unconditional acceptance of the self. It's to say there's good, bad, and ugly in who I am. And despite that, I love myself anyways. And so, for example, I know what makes me good. I'm a really kind person. I'm very loyal. I'm really fun. I'm very passionate. The things that make me bad, I would say that I can be extremely impatient. I have very high expectations of myself and others, and it often becomes unmanageable and unkind on the receiving end of it. I can be controlling. The ugly of who I am, sometimes in the impatience, and when I'm really stressed, I can just be, I'm rude to, for example, Uber drivers, and at the airport, sometimes I feel mean. Sometimes I'm so wrapped up in my own world, I forget or I fail to see how my actions are having an adverse impact on others. So it can sometimes feel like I'm being selfish and more. And I could go on and on. But I know this about myself. I know all three of I know what makes me good, I know what makes me bad, and I know what makes me ugly. And on my journey of trying to live my best, I'm accepting even the bad and the ugly of who I am. And even though I know I have bad and ugly, I accept it anyways. And this is what self-love and self-acceptance looks like. It's not just the, oh my God, I love what makes me amazing, but it's the, yeah, I'm not a perfect person. I'm perfectly imperfect and imperfectly perfect. Like they go hand in hand, and I still love myself. Because when we love ourselves, we care significantly less about what others will think. I honestly, there's a handful of people whose opinions I deeply care about. Like I care about my family, my dear friends, my beloveds think. I care about what my clients think because they pay me to do what I do. So I have to care what they think. I care what a handful of other people think, and then everyone else, I don't give a fuck.
I feel like women care more about what other people think of them than men do. And so do you find when you're work, because I know you work a lot with companies, and I know companies are right now trying to get more women involved, especially in leadership positions. Is that something that women are bringing up to you?
Yeah. So based on my work, I would tell you that women, in my view, care more about what others will think of them than men. But if I were to push it further, here's what I would tell you. Any cultural community, any group of people who are on the heightened level of receiving bias and judgment will care more. So it's not just women, it's people of color care more and worry more about what others will think about themselves. Others will think of them because of racism. Young people are going to care a lot more than older people around what others think of them because they're on the lower end of the ladder in terms of getting ahead in society. People from religious minorities, when you're a minority, you care more. Why? Because bias and judgment is constantly coming your way, and the majority rules, dominance in society. So basically, these are forms of supremacy and oppression that have an adverse impact on how we think and feel. So absolutely, yes, as women, we care more. Why? Because we have more bias coming our way, and we have been socialized to care more and be more nurturing and be more group focused. But let's throw in there that even amongst women, I'd say women of color and women from collectivist group focused cultures, it's even harder for us because we care not just because of misogyny and patriarchy, we care also because of racism. And when you come from a group focused culture, which most of the cultures in the world are. So check this. group focused culture versus individually focused culture. Anglo-rooted countries around the world are mostly individually focused. And then all of the other cultures around the world are group focused. So countries across Asia, East Asia, South Asia, West Asia, countries across the Middle East, countries across Africa, South Central America and the Caribbean, and our indigenous cultures here in Canada and the US are highly group focused. When you come from a highly group focused culture, it's all about what will society think? What will others say? And so you just grow up caring way more about what others will think about you. And then, of course, you can layer in the other challenges that we have. Then, yeah, we're on heightened alert all the time. And so, growing up as a brown girl, I constantly felt like, OMG, I can't breathe because you're like constantly doing this lovely dance of being polite in Indian society, for example, for us, around what will others think and don't get judged and come across as though you're the perfect, flower petal, which is utter bullshit, but there it is. And then in white society, I was constantly doing the dance around, oh my God, I'm not like those low life brown people that you think I am, or I'm not like one of those nerdy brown people and I'm like way better than others. It was like the internalization of oppression, or like having a colonized heart or mind, which is where I was before. And I'm working on to like kick white supremacy out of my blood and body. And so that dance, it's effing exhausting. I get asked this all the time. So do I think, here we are, in this time and age, do I think we've made progress? Hell's yes, we've made progress. Like we're obviously better because we're in a place where there are more women, people of color, people from the LGBTQ communities, persons with disabilities, people from different religious minority groups, and indigenous peoples and more, better represented in leadership roles, in politics, in across workplace sectors. We see more artists and musicians and more from across a range of cultural communities flourishing and thriving now. So yes, we've made progress. Are we where we should be? Hell's effing no. And why are we not there? It's because forms of power, privilege, and supremacy continue to infiltrate all of our systems. So everything from access to justice, to access to education, access to employment, access to healthcare, and more, we continue to see that men rank supreme over women and people from the trans community, that white people have rank supreme over people of color and indigenous peoples, and so much more. And so given that there is so much work to do, for me, it's like my mission in life, like I am like, let me tell you, like there is so much work to be done. I am not leaving this earth until I feel like I have made a mark. Like sometimes I'll be on a plane and there's high amount of turbulence and I'll literally like say my prayer, I'll do some thought, and then I'll go, oh my God, but it's not my time to go because I have so much more I have yet to achieve. I'm not ready to go. Because the systems continue to perpetuate all kinds of forms of oppression and marginalization. And so I feel deeply passionate about this, as you can possibly tell, like as the fire in me is like, just like it's on. And I use a lot of data, a lot of frameworks, a lot of practical strategies and tools in my work with CEOs and others that I advise on how do we engage in systems disruption. I will tell you that I feel like my life is getting easier in making this change in some respects, and then it's still extremely hard. It's easier because up until Trump was elected, we were very politically correct globally in talking about the level of hate that exists. But now with his election and the aftermath of that, hate, we see it more visibly. It's like I always tell people, it's not like there's more hate now than there was before. It's just it's more visible.
Yes.
Like a lot of us have known that misogyny and racism exists, white supremacy exists. It just wasn't in our faces as much, and so we're seeing it more. So we're able to have more sophisticated, elevated levels of conversation, and we have technology, we have globalization. The world is dramatically shifting, and so the imperative to care is significantly higher, and it's often tied to profitability. And so when you tie it to dollars and cents in a global capitalistic world, which we are entrenched in, whether we like it or not, money talks. And so if you can say to a leader, this is going to make you more money. And by the way, it'll look really good and your legacy, and you'll feel really good as a human being. People are more inclined to commit to it. So things are shifting, but super slowly.
You were telling me before that you often engage with people that come up to you after you speak. And so oftentimes they ask you questions, and that kind of helps guide where your next video goes or where your next topic goes. So I know you've been just going to so many engagements.
Yes.
Right now, what is sort of the most common question that people are asking you?
Lately, I have been getting a lot of questions about relationships, love, finding love, and sexuality in particular. Like, it's so odd because I had not expected that as someone who does empowerment work, and especially with like that diversity and inclusion angle or the social justice angle, that is what people would be following up with me about.
Okay.
But I'm getting a lot of it from a lot of women of color globally who are like, you know what? I'm 25, I'm 35, I'm 45, and I'm fed up with the pressure to find someone perfect and get married and settle down, or the pressure to have kids, or yet again, I've had more romantic heartbreak. Another guy or another person has cheated on me. What do I do? Or how, as women of color who come from cultures where there's a lot of stigma attached to sexuality, can I be a sexual person? And so one of the things I have always said in doing my work as someone who does empowerment and like self-growth and leadership and diversity, inclusion and all that, and authenticity, is you can ask me anything and I'll talk about anything. And so suddenly I'm talking about, like, I'm actually putting out videos on sex and sexuality, which I never thought would happen. And in fact, I'm waiting for my Punjabi father to be like, what the hell are you doing? Stop putting those videos out immediately. He has said nothing yet, and I know he cyber creeps me and he watches all of my stuff, so I know
maybe he's interested too to hear your thoughts,
right? So but do you know what this suggests to me, Amin? I think in so many cultures and communities around the world, this is exactly what we talk about, like as girls when we hang out. And I know boys, people, everyone's doing this, but we're not talking about it openly. And so now, in my view, I'm like, okay, if you want to talk about this, I'm happy to talk about it. Here we go.
That's interesting, because I would think, like, here you are, this life coach, best-selling author, you're on stage, people have a chance to like have a few minutes with you, and that's what they're asking you about.
Lately, I would say, well, so when I say to them, what do you want me to talk about more of? That's what they're saying. Talk more about that. When I am like, when they have like, say, 5 minutes with me, or if I'm sitting next to them somewhere, or I run into someone at a wedding reception, or like last night at the party I was at, some people stopped me to talk to me. So they'll say things like, you know, the stuff that really resonates with them includes like, how do you become successful? How do you live your best? I get a lot of the, I don't know who I am and I want to be more authentic and I don't know how. How do you, here's one that I get all the time. How do you be authentic if it's not in alignment with what your parents want you to do, or your family or society wants you to do? And so I get a lot of that. And, you know, I'm sure you picked this up already. Like, I'm not your typical conservative, traditional Indian girl. Like, I'm just not. I never have been. It's not my beat. It's not my vibe. And I'm like, I would much rather be in a place where Indian society shuns me and wants nothing to do with me, but I'm living my best and living my truth and soaring high because I'm being true to myself, than have a bunch of Indian family, friends, and people around me who judge me all the time, and I feel like I can't breathe. I will never be that person. And so when I'm asked by people, like, what do I do? How do I create this shift? Like, I always will say to them, like, what do you want most? Like, what is it that you deeply in your core want most? If it is to be surrounded by tribes and tribes and tribes of people who don't, but to have them there, even if they judge you, then fine, conform and do what they say and behave the way they want you to. But if you want to feel liberated and feel like you can breathe, then it's going to mean you're going to have to take some actual steps to shift how you live your life. And there will be negative consequences.
Of course.
There always are. For example, your parents may not talk to you for a while. I would say to you truthfully, over the last few years, I have had a few timeouts with my parents. We've had sometimes a timeout is a week, sometimes a timeout is a few months. We are not currently in a timeout, which is nice. We're like, I saw them on the weekend, all is good. But we've had to have timeouts because it's you don't like what I'm doing, you're judging me, and I don't like that. So let's just take a timeout. And so like readjust, recalibrate, and then we'll come back together. It may mean that you'll have to shed friends. I've shed friends over the last few years as well. But you know what? I'm okay with that. Why? Because I was worried if I break up with this friend group, then who's going to be my friend? But you know what happens is you break up with that friend group, and then that void that it left gets filled with like new people who are like awesome and love you even more for who you really are, and like the you that you're putting out there. So that's amazing. I have, it's significantly altered, well, how I work. So I would say to you, I rarely take on clients now where I'm like, I don't like you, I don't believe in your values, or you're being difficult, not going to work with you again. That has been a shift. But the area where I had not expected my commitment to authenticity to have such a profoundly positive impact is in my romantic life or my love life. So I, for years, have like had so much heartbreak because I was constantly dating people who were not right for me. And I didn't know this at the time. I thought, oh my gosh, you seem like really great, or you seem like you'd be wonderful. And then it would either end amicably and all was well, or I would end up being hurt because the man disrespected me profoundly, and I'd be heartbroken. And I've been heartbroken so many times. And living this life of being who I am and really understanding who I am, knowing who I am, and embracing myself and cultivating self-love and self-acceptance, all of what I've talked to you about today, all of that. The unexpected consequence for me was that I got really good with understanding the kind of love I really wanted in my life and the kind of person I really needed. And once that happened, I actually attracted into my life someone who's amazing. Like, he's just awesome. And he's so different than who I was dating in the past.
How so? Because I'm trying to figure out you're meeting someone, and what is it that made you choose the person that ended up disrespecting you versus who you're dating now? Like, were there warning signs and you just ignored it? Or
I ignored the warning signs. So here's something. So how about this? There are always warning signs, people. There are always warning signs. We just choose to ignore them. Why? Because it feels safer and easier to stay in a relationship that's unhealthy, so that we're not alone, and that someone actually in some way is loving us, because we feel unlovable otherwise. There's always warning signs. We just don't see them, or we choose to ignore them. So I was checklisting. I was doing what a lot of corporate women do. So I'm a lawyer by training, corporate world, titles, status, all that other capitalistic bullshit that I bought into. And I was checklisting. I would, like, when I would meet someone, I'd be like, give me your biodata, like, give me your resume.
So what was on your checklist? What were you looking for?
Highly educated, corporate job, making a high amount of income, like GQ, looked really good. I mean, in addition to being smart and kind and blah, blah, blah. And I dated a lot of men like that. And I also dated men who were not that same checklist, but I was checklisting there too. And the checklist was based on superficial stuff that actually, at the end of the day, that's not what I wanted. And when I shifted away from markers of status and external accomplishments into heart and soul and what's in someone's core, like who they really are, as opposed to their accomplishments and the stuff that we can externalize. And I shifted into the core. I really deeply started to understand what I need as a person to feel whole and complete. That's when I started to look for that. And so my partner, he's awesome. He's like, first of all, he's a professional musician. And so he's a creative type. And it is so refreshing to be with someone who's not corporate and who is creative. I mean, he's an entrepreneur and he's ambitious and driven. So we have that in alignment. But his beat is totally different because he sees the world in a different way. Like, it's so much more holistic and creative. And our values are aligned in ways in which I hadn't had before. Our activities that we like to engage in are similar. we have different personalities, but that's perfectly fine and great, and we make that work. But I guess the takeaway I would say for you is that for me is if you do the work to figure out who you are and then cultivate self-love and focus really hard on living your best, you'll be better positioned to attract into your life the love you actually need and deserve, as opposed to superficial shit. And then related to that, I'll say, I'm now in my 40s. I'm 44. And I, in my 20s, felt so much pressure to find someone and settle down, and I almost did, and I'm so glad I didn't. And then the same thing happened in my 30s, and I was so freaked out because, like, as an Indian woman on the bride market, your value is plummeting when you are into your 30s, and let alone mid 30s, and let alone 40, and now you are a social pariah. Now you go to social functions, and now people, all they say to you is not like, when are you going to get married? They're afraid to say that because you're a social pariah. Instead, they say, how's your career? And so, fine. But here I am in my 40s, happier than I've ever been in terms of like my love life. And so all this stupid pressure that we put on ourselves in our 20s and 30s, oh my God, it doesn't have to be that way.
Wow. Because I feel like that is something that I've been noticing right now is more and more women, especially South Asian women, are here, especially in Toronto. I know so many amazing women that are single. And it's funny because as much as they achieve, they will tell me that, oh my God, I have like a family function. I know the number one question is going to be like, when are you getting married? Or they're getting set up with anyone. I hope for the next generation, maybe it gets better, but that is really much what I hear at parties where if the friend has a husband, it's like two groups. They become like, oh, the perfect Indian woman here. She's got her career, but she's got her husband. And then the other group, which is like, they're shunned, where it's like, cool, you've had success. Oh, you have your own place. Oh, you make your own money. You're independent. Cool. But something must be wrong
she's
with
one
you.
of those.
Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. And actually, so this is when I say, like, I get so many questions about relationships and autonomy and how do you be you, and tied back to love and relationships. This is what I'm talking about.
Okay.
It sucks. I will tell you this. It sucks.
It sucks, yeah.
Having been on the receiving end of it for decades, it sucks. And
that's why when I read your bio, I was like, okay, because you freely admit on your bio that you're in your 40s.
Yeah.
I saw that you weren't married. You don't have kids. So I was like, oh my gosh, like what an amazing role model, because finally, like, it's like, I feel like women, and again, I'm just using South Asian women, we need more role models like that, because all you see is like in serials or in movies, it's like she always ends up finding love. She always gets married. It's always like that's the end goal. And we need more women like you that are like, hey, I'm successful. I'm happy. I may not
and
be
arguably
married.
happier. How about this? Like, try this on for size, because like, how many people have gotten married to someone where they're like,
yes,
but my clock is a ticking and society is a watching, so I'll do it, and then they're unhappy, and it doesn't have to be that way. I also froze my eggs. I did a blog on that, and I talk openly about it, so you can just Google my name, Ritu Bhasin, and froze eggs, egg frozen in a freezer. So I froze my eggs when I was 37, and I'm so glad that I did. And they're there. I can use them at any time while it is still medically possible and health-wise possible to do. And so even there are ways that we can step off the conventional or traditional way of being in order to live our truth.
Of course. Okay. I know you've got places to be, so I'm going to wrap this up. But before I let you go, everything in your journey, I think, has been because you weren't afraid. Well, maybe you were afraid, but you still took that step to pursue it. So for you to, leave your cushy corporate job because you did have an amazing career to pursue being an entrepreneur. I'm hoping somebody watching this, if they are in a position where they're like, you know what, I just feel like there's more for me, or they maybe know what they want to do, but they're afraid to take that step towards it.
I can't remember where I read this quote or heard this quote, but it was so powerful. It goes something like this: feel the fear, but do it anyways. And this is how I live. I deeply, fundamentally believe in my ability to transform and change my life. I constantly feel afraid to do things. I feel insecure all the time. I feel like an imposter sometimes, although it's less and less. The more I step into my power and the more I cultivate self-love, I can tell you feeling like an imposter has subsided quite a bit. But even though I feel afraid in these moments, I'm like, F that, I'm still going to do it. I'm going to feel the fear and I'm going to do it. And the reason I'm going to do it is because the difference between those of us who dream and those of us who actually succeed and achieve our dreams is the action piece. A lot of us have dreams, but we don't act on them. It's that acting on them piece that makes the magic happen. And one of the things that I feel really blessed about, and I also did a blog about if you want to start a business, strategy and execution, and how do you make the execution piece happen in particular. A lot of us have these ideas, but we don't actually take action because we're afraid. So take the step, be bold, leap, take a breath and just do it. Because, and this is going to sound really cheesy and so hockey-esque, but so appropriate because we're so Canadian. You miss 100% of the shots you don't take, and you never know. I can give you example after example, Amin, of the moments where I was like, you should do that. And I'm like, no, I shouldn't do that because I'll get the answer will be no, or you'll get rejected. And then I did it anyways, and I wasn't rejected. Like even me sitting here with you today, the reason you have me here is you heard about me or you saw something. And if I hadn't done those things, I wouldn't be here with you today. Right. And who knows what will come from this conversation for you and for me. We miss 100% of the shots we don't take. So just be afraid. It's okay to be afraid. It's normal to be afraid, but do it anyways.
Amazing. I hope people feel motivated after hearing that.
I hope so too. Because you have choice and control over how you live your life.
Yeah.
You get to choose every single thing in your life. You have choice. Even when you feel like you don't have choice, you have choice.
You do have a choice. That's
you
a good point.
always have choice. Exercise your choice. And in fact, I can tell you right now, empowerment is really rooted in our ability to exercise choice and control over how we behave. The more you start to consciously become aware of exercising choice and control over how you live, the more empowered you'll feel because you'll see I can change how I live.
Amazing. There's just so much power in that.
Right?
There is. Like already just that statement, I felt that power from that statement. So hopefully people take that away as well. Thank you so much for chatting with me.
No, thank you so much for having me. I wish you all the best, and to everyone watching and listening, thank you.
And I want to quickly mention, if people want to find out where you're speaking next or where they want to follow you, where can they go?
Yes. So the best place to go from all of my stuff is my website, ritubhasin.com. When you're there, you can sign up for my mailing list to get all of the goodness to your inboxes. My favorite way to hear from people, like if you want to get a hold of me and you actually want to talk to me, is to send me a message on Instagram. I always tell people, if you email me, the response rate is 3 months. If you send me a message on Instagram, you're looking at 12 hours because I'm obsessed with Instagram stories in particular. You should check my stories. They're awesome.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you. Hey everyone, I hope you enjoyed my interview. Please subscribe for more videos like this.